The UK leaves the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. At this time, whether a deal has been negotiated or not, severe barriers to current trade between the UK and the EU will be implemented in the form of tariffs, as we will most likely be removed from our free trade agreement with the European Union. I have devised a game to attempt to solve a major potential problem regarding the supply side of trade in the post-Brexit period. The logic regarding the creation of this game is simple, utilising Schelling's ideas on bargaining power. Post-Brexit, all firms in both the EU and the UK will have the option of continuing their contracts with their current supplier and incurring a noticeable loss of margins due to the sudden implementation of tariffs, or attempting to find new suppliers from overseas who will offer lower prices as a result of the removal of the competitive advantage gained by both parties from the free trade zone. Consequently, both EU and UK firms choosing new suppliers is Pareto superior to the firms staying with their current suppliers. The EU is affected to a lesser extent than the UK, as UK firms are a far smaller proportion of suppliers to EU firms than EU firms are to UK firms, due to the UK's smaller size, causing the EU to have greater bargaining power. This is shown by the larger loss to UK firms of continuing with current trade in the bottom right corner of the game. Here are some essential definitions relevant to the analysis of this game, primarily sourced from Straub's literature, namely payoff dominance, risk dominance, and the calculation of Nash product. The two Nash equilibria of the game are highlighted in purple. At these points, there is no incentive for either UK or EU firms to change their strategy. The Nash products for both Nash equilibria are calculated here. Based on these results and using the earlier definitions, we can see that both UK and EU firms continuing with their current trade is risk dominant. However, we also know that as both sets of firms finding new trade partners is the Pareto superior equilibrium, the firms changing their suppliers is payoff dominant. This causes a conflict between the two Nash equilibria, as each equilibrium is dominant in one way. If the risk dominant but Pareto inferior equilibrium is the end outcome, then a coordination failure will have occurred. As shown in Cooper's literature, coordination failure is a valid risk. He gives multiple examples of experimenters, such as Van Hyuk et al. And Cooper et al., whose results indicate a tendency towards coordination failure due to an individual's inherent risk-averse tendencies. Should this coordination failure occur between the UK and the EU, the consequences will be guaranteed to generate a negative economic shock to the UK, and indeed to all countries inside the European Union, though not to the same extent. The increase in supply costs for all firms using imported parts in their production will cause reduced profits for these firms at current prices, leading to falling consumption, rising unemployment, and a potential recession. This is a distinct potential problem associated with Brexit. In theory, the solution to this game is simple. If both sets of firms ignore the risk associated with finding new partners, they will both benefit from a Pareto superior Nash equilibrium. However, the reason this dilemma exists in the first place is due to these firms' risk-averse nature. The solution to this game must neutralize this tendency in the firms in order for both to achieve higher long-term profits. To conclude, this coordination failure can be solved with relative ease in an experimental setting, when incentives can be adjusted entirely by experimenters, such as with Hammond et al.'s all or none incentives, or Brandt and Cooper's temporary incentive increases. One theoretical way of altering these firms' incentives is through government intervention, specifically government-funded subsidies that require a changing of suppliers to non-EU or non-UK firms respectively. This would increase the incentive for firms to change their suppliers, increasing the potential profit gain enough for both sets of firms to change their strategy with a subsidy of the right size. There is the question of how equitable this is though. This is an example of heavy market influence from both government parties. The risk of government failure and the argument about how fair it is to use taxpayer money on this no doubt expensive endeavour are major points to consider before this intervention goes ahead. However, in the long run, after these subsidies have changed the supply to these firms, they can be removed and the firms will stay at the Pareto superior equilibrium, in line with Brandt and Cooper's theory on temporary incentive increases, without any further drain on government resources. A major assumption I've made throughout all my analysis is the firm's risk-averse nature, which leads them to prioritize stability over an increase in profits. In reality, it's plausible and even likely that these firms may in fact be risk neutral, or at least only slightly risk-averse, so the increase in profits is enough to incentivize them to switch their suppliers and solve the game. In this case, no coordination failure will have occurred at all, and both sets of firms will enjoy the benefits of the Pareto superior Nash equilibrium. To summarise, Brexit without the continuation of the UK in the EU's free trade agreement could cause this coordination failure to arise, assuming both sets of firms are at least moderately risk-averse. Once the equilibrium of continuing with their current supplier has been settled upon, it's very difficult for the two sets of firms to change their behaviour together, as Brandt and Cooper outline in their final remarks. The solution to this game via government subsidies is not perfect, but although an efficiency loss will occur in the short term, in the long term, after the subsidies are removed, it will provide greater efficiency to both parties, solving the potential coordination failure arising from a Brexit without the UK continuing as a member of the Free Trade Agreement.